Welcome to the WanderLearn podcast. I'm your host, Francis Tapon. This is an Ask Me Anything episode. Yep, the AMAs. This is when I take your questions and answer them as best I can. Normally, I like to read a 5-star review that I got on either iTunes or anywhere that people write their reviews. But then I got an email from DC Qranky who wrote,
"You only read 5-star reviews on your show?"
Now, by the way, he wrote a 5-star review also himself. But he writes in this email,
"Come on, man. Don't you want to encourage authentic dialogue? I think you should read all reviews. Not only will that encourage engagement, it will give you feed for your podcast. Let's say some douchebag like, DC Qranky gives you a 1-star review and says you don't know your ass from a hole in the ground and you're full of crap and you're playing off Trump. Africa's a shithole country. I know it's a continent. So why are you wasting your time? That's great stuff. Engage. Bring the fucker on your show."
All right, DC Qranky, I'll bring you on my fucking show. DC Qranky brings up a fantastic point. And so therefore, in his honor, I will read all reviews. And so I'm going to first read a 5-star review that's short, and then I'm going to read a blistering 1-star review that I got. And I'll respond. Let's start off with a 5-star review that just came in February. It's short. It's written by R.E. Victoria C. And she writes, the title is Eclectic Mix of Fascinating Topics.
Francis Tapon's podcast has outstanding audio production. His voice is pleasant to listen to. He covers a wide range of topics and always offers a fresh and original perspective. He will challenge the status quo. I become one of his patrons at Patreon. You must subscribe to his podcast.
Well, thank you so much, Victoria. I couldn't have said it better myself. But seriously, I really appreciate that. That's fantastic. Not much to add there. Now, let's drop into my 2 negative reviews on Apple Podcast. So let's move first to a 3-star review written by Ali Barbara. I assume it's a woman. And the title of her review is Lots of Profanity.
As a writer, Francis is a great storyteller. He also knows some real adventurers. I was excited to listen to the podcast, but unfortunately, there's a lot of profanity. And Francis doesn't give his guests an opportunity to answer the questions he asks. I would love to hear more stories from the guests.
Well, thank you, Ali Barbara, for giving me at least 3 stars and not just giving me 1 star. I mean, so often people, when they give reviews, it's either got to be a 5-star or 1 star. You know, when you see people who review apps on Google Play Store, or probably, I'm sure, on whatever Apple's Play Store is, or whatever they call Apple. Anyway, wherever you get your apps on Apple Store, they give 5-star or 1 star. It's just so binary. I'll just respond to her. She says there's a lot of profanity. Well, fuck you. There is a lot of fucking profanity now. Fuck off. Oh, sorry. Did I just say that? Okay. The other thing is, she says I interrupt guests. You know, I got that criticism 2 or 3 times from my first interview with Sim Blanchard. And I asked him afterwards if I had done that. And real quick, I'll address this issue, because in general, I don't think I do that very often, because I do so many interviews through Zoom and that kind of stuff. And there's often some sort of latency. And so I really have to let them finish what they're saying to make sure that I don't interrupt them, because it's so easy when you're having these Zoom calls with these latency periods when you're talking with them, that's very easy to talk over each other. So I really try to avoid that quite a bit. And I think anybody who's listened to my podcast, a lot of my podcasts, will notice that. Where I got critiqued on that was when I interviewed Sim. And what a lot of people don't know is, A, I'm very good friends with Sim, and B, he was in the room with me, and C, he had his own microphone, which allowed us, since we both had our own mic, I didn't have to pass the mic between us. It was allowed us to both talk at the same time. And if you think about it, whenever you're with anybody, a friend, a close buddy, it's quite common to finish their sentence or something like that. That's how you banter with people often. I think that's could have been the cause of that situation. And here's another thing, actually. I remember Rick Steves was criticized for that as well. But Rick Steves does it way more than I do, because I listen to his podcast all the time. But I completely understand. Why? Because he's got maybe 3 8-minute segments that he's got to go through. He's got 8 minutes to dive into it. And if you let the guest just blab on and on, he's going to not be able to get the juice or the meat of the content. And so he needs to keep the pace, and you just don't want to hear a guest drone on for 5 minutes about something. Usually, I mean, sometimes the guest can be quite that fascinating, but podcasts are much more interesting if there's a conversation, a back and forth, that kind of stuff. Of course, I'm being completely hypocritical because right now I'm just talking about myself, but you get the point, I hope. And so that's why oftentimes on television as well as radio that has a time limit, the host has to interrupt the guest to keep them to keep the pacing right for the audience. And so I don't interrupt very often, I think, but I can understand why people do. Anyway, she might have just downloaded some of my bad podcasts, but she's probably not listening to this anymore because I interrupt her and all that good stuff. But if you're listening, come on back. If you're not listening, well then fuck you! All right, next one. Because she doesn't like profanity. Get the joke? Okay, sorry. Let's go on to my favorite critical review on Apple Podcasts. It's a 1-star review. This episode is sponsored by the Athletic Brewing Company, which makes yummy non-alcoholic beer. Now, before you disparage non-alcoholic beer, consider this. During the 2020 International Beer Challenge, the Athletic Brewing Company won Brewer of the Year for North America. And they only make non-alcoholic beer. Enjoy the refreshing taste of craft beer without the alcohol or the hangover or the beer belly. Last year, Athletic Brewing donated over $300,000 to trail restoration projects. With Athletic Brewing, you can even drink and drive. When the cop pulls you over for driving too slowly, you can say, "Dude, I was just chilling, drinking beer." Non-alcoholic beer, that is. Although you can't order beer by mail, you can order non-alcoholic beer by mail. So go to athleticbrewing.com, use the promo code WanderLearn20 to get 20% off your first order. Buy at least 2 6-packs so you can get free shipping. That's WanderLearn20 with no spaces to get 20% off. But this one is called Bummed and Disappointed. Bummed and Disappointed. Who creates a permanent username that's called Bummed and Disappointed? Now, a couple of possibilities. They just leave 1-star reviews everywhere they go. And, that's their thing. Their shtick. They like to go on Apple Podcasts and that's their username, Bummed and Disappointed, because it sticks with you. Whatever your username that you pick goes with you everywhere you go. So this person is always bummed and disappointed. And so that's one possibility. But here's what I think. And you're going to hear from the tone. I'm probably the only person that Bummed and Disappointed ever reviewed on Apple Podcast. He or she did it just for the express purpose of just ripping into me. Got to respect that. I was like, wow, you got to go out of your way to rip me a new asshole. It's fabulous. All right. So if you want to hear how vindictive this thing is, the title is Travel for Privileged Tech Bros. I listened. You don't have to. All right. Here we go.
Such a shame, as I came to this from the informative Extra Pack of Peanuts podcast, and to be honest, there is truly impressive, insightful, and helpful information to be had here, but this guy is so backwards and obnoxious that it makes the episodes unlistenable. If you want to listen to an impossibly smug, narcissistic, self-satisfied, libertarian tech bro tell you how poor and working class people working in shops should be friendlier, then this is for you. This guy's wealth and sense of entitlement just oozes through every episode like a toxic cancer. A naif who has no knowledge of world history or contemporary politics. While you will accidentally get some good info about traveling, you'll have to cringe while listening to this jag off fluff up his own ego. Ugly. For shame.
Whew, biting. Love it. This is great shit. Okay, so now DC Qranky said, I quote DC Qranky, he says, "Get the fucker on the air." In other words, bring him up. Of course, but I can't. There's no way to contact Bummed and Disappointed. And of course, it sounds like a he. There's no way for me to contact him. I cannot respond to his review. All I can do is give my answer here for you to hear. It's going to be very mature. No, you know what I'm going to say, some badass mother. All right, but I won't. Most of the stuff here I really can't argue with in the sense that it's his opinion. You know, if he thinks I'm smug, narcissistic, self-satisfied, I am a libertarian, yeah. And tech, I like tech, yeah. So I'm a bro, I guess. Now, he says how poor and working class people in the shops should be friendlier. I mean, I think he's referring to the fact that I was talking about American smiles. And so I think that people should smile when they are in customer service situations. And so I think that's what he's wailing about. And this guy's wealth and sense of entitlement. I was like, this guy's wealth. Do I talk about my net worth on this show? I know I talk about Bitcoin, but I never tell you whether I have 0.00001 Bitcoin or not. Sense of entitlement. Okay, maybe I'm not sure what I feel entitled to, but no knowledge of world history or contemporary politics. Okay, if you feel that way, I understand. And I need to fluff my own ego. Okay, maybe I do need to fluff my own ego. All right. I just think it's interesting that somebody would go through the trouble to create a username on Apple Podcasts just to leave this review, because my guess is that this is the only review Bummed and Confused Disappointed has ever left on Apple Podcasts, unless he got pissed off at some other podcast and he got to say, hey, great, I get to use my same username once again. So this is my guess. But boy, oh boy. Anyway, I can send him to therapy, I suppose. That is my worst review. Now, in fact, I think there's a good reason to then read this review. And thank you, DC Qranky, for the idea. Even though I can't bring my critics on my podcast, I'd love to. If you're listening to this, anybody who criticizes my podcast or who wants to pick a fight with me, come on to my podcast. It's great. I'm happy to debate. One benefit of reading my critics is that maybe if you actually like this show, and I hope since you might be a subscriber and you're listening to multiple things, is that you actually do, well then help write more 5-star reviews. Hey, instead of reading a bunch of 5-star reviews to encourage people to write more 5-star reviews, maybe I should just spend my days reading just 1-star reviews. And everybody will feel sorry for me and say, oh God, poor Francis, he's getting beaten like crazy. So I've got 27 reviews on Apple Podcasts, and the average rating is 4.0 at this moment when I'm recording this at the end of February 2021. So there you have it. Those are some of the reviews I've gotten recently, and I would love it if you guys take a short second and just hit the 5-star button or any button, and I'll read it no matter what. Normally, I don't release the podcast on the same day that I record it, but since I'm going to do that today, I thought I might mention something that is timely, and that is just the Bitcoin price, which I started the year off recommending it. And I said they would go to $40,000. I think at the time, at the end of this year, was $28,000, something like that. Well, today it's $50,000, and it's way ahead of my price prediction. And we're not even the end of February. It's only 2 months into the year. In fact, it already went up to $58,000 at one brief moment. And I think it's getting a little bit overheated, but that's okay. I think it's probably going to rise again and maybe get as high as 60, 70,000 or something like that, and then might pull back dramatically from there. So in my upcoming episodes, I'm going to interview this guy who makes the best travel podcast out there, period. But first, later on this week, I'm going to come out with another podcast of AMA. So my next episode will be another AMA where I answer some more questions from other people, including DC Qranky once again. Boy, that guy likes to give me great advice. I love him. All right. That's it. Thank you, guys.
And that concludes this episode of the WanderLearn podcast, where we explore travel, technology, and transformation. If you'd like to see the show notes with links to what we talked about, or if you'd like to comment on the show, or if you'd like to ask me a question, then go to WanderLearn.com and click on this episode. If you'd like to connect with me, just remember Tapon. That's my first initial and my last name. Tapon is the username I use on all social media. You can also get to my website by going to ftapon.com. And here's one last reason to remember Tapon. If you like what I do and would like to get rewarded for supporting my projects, then go to patreon.com/ftapon. That's where you can pick up some remarkable rewards for as little as $2 a month. And now for 5 quick favors. Number 1, subscribe to the WanderLearn podcast. 2, download it. 3, share it. 4, review it somewhere. And 5, sign up for my newsletter at WanderLearn.com. Our theme music was composed by Eric Stratman. This is Francis Tapon, encouraging you to wander and learn.